Hello, in this video I'm going to share with you how to construct the nightgown for the 18-inch doll. Think of an American Girl doll for what size doll this will fit. So I have a piece of elastic here that is in a cord shape, and that measures do a quick thing here, 8 inches. So an 8-inch length of the elastic cord is what you need. And I cut this out of flannel so it would be like a nightgown. And you need 2 of the rectangle pieces that are in the pattern, and this forms the ruffle at the bottom of the nightgown. There's 2 arm pieces, and there's no difference between the right and the left or the front and the back on this. And then there's 2 body pieces. Now there is a front and there is a back to the body. And if you put them on top of each other and line them up on the sides, you'll notice that one of them is a little bit deeper cut in the front than the, because this is what forms the neckline, than the other one. The deeper cut one that I have here on top in this shot here is the front piece. So that's how you can remember what is the front and what is the back of this nightgown. Okay, so the first thing we need to do to get started with the construction of the nightgown is we need to take the sleeves. This is one of the sleeves. And we're going to come here to this raw edge. Here's the top. This is where your neckline is. These are the 2 sleeve seams. This is the sleeve side seam. And here is the bottom. So we're going to fold this under, narrow hem, and then we're going to give this a second fold, just like that. I took this to my iron and pressed it. And now I just need to do a little stitch right along this fold line to hold this hem to the sleeve. So that's the bottom, like this part of the sleeve here. So the first thing we're going to do to start the construction on this nightgown is we're going to attach the sleeves to the front and back of the nightgown. So I have pinned along this diagonal line here, right sides together, one sleeve to one side and one sleeve to the other side, and this is my front piece. And I'm going to make sure that I line up my top nice and even, because I'm just going to do a zigzag around this top edge to finish that off. It's not going to be turned under, so you want that to be as close as you can to even there. So I'm just using 1/4 of an inch seam guide. Going to lock my stitches in by going back and forth, removing my pins as I get to them. All right, so cutting my thread back to my fabric. And there's one side done, so I'm going to sew the other side here, and then I'll show you how to attach the back section. So I've attached both sleeves now to the front. So now we need to attach it to the back section. So what I'm going to do is, right sides together, I'm going to come to one of the sleeves, and again I'm going to line the top so that it aligns even, and then come down here to this side. So you can see now that I have a sleeve, the front section, the next sleeve, and now I have pinned the back to the other side of the sleeve. So I'm going to sew this seam, and then we're going to attach it to the other side, the other sleeve to the other side of the back. And now we have 4 sections sewn together. This is the back, then a sleeve, then the front, then a sleeve. So now I'm going to take this outer angled edge of the sleeve, and I'm going to match that up with the angle of the back piece where the sleeve attaches on this back piece. So I'm just going to pin this in place, and then we'll sew this really quick. And then we'll have all these 4 pieces attached, and we're ready to go for sewing up the sides and then putting the ruffle on. Now, I'm not finishing off these seams, but you can, so that you don't get raveling, which actually I might just go ahead and take this to my serger and serge these seams. But you can do a zigzag stitch on this. You can bind this in with bias binding if you want. You can do an overcast, or you could serge all these seams so that nothing unravels. So now you can see I have a front. Here's the front. Here's the sleeve. Here's the back piece. And here is the other sleeve. So like I said, we need to finish these seams off, or you can leave them raw. But if you wash this, this is going to start to unravel and make a mess. So I'm going to go ahead and just serge this real quick and be right back. So I did an overlock stitch on my seams here with my serger, and you can see what that looks like. A lot of machines nowadays offer a stitch that's very similar to that built into your machine if you don't happen to have a serger. So the next thing we're going to do is, in this neckline area, we're going to go around, and again, if you have a serger, this works great on a serger, just to do an overlock stitch around that top. But if you don't, you would just do either an overlock stitch with your machine, if that was offered as a stitch option, or do what I'm going to do, which is a zigzag, because just about every machine comes with a zigzag, unless it's a real old one or a commercial one, an industrial one that just does a straight stitch. So I have now put on my zigzag as my stitch choice. I'm going to do a width. I have a width that can go from 0 to 4. So I'm going to do a 2, which is about halfway in between. And now my stitch length I'm going to put down to a 2. I have the choices of going from 0 to 4 on my stitch length also, because I want these stitches to be close together so that it really seams off this top edge. Because this is going to be showing now. This is not going to be hidden. So again, I'm just doing a simple zigzag. Going to lock this in just like I would any other stitch. Now I'm making sure that I'm going off the top edge, or to the right of my fabric here. One of the stitches is going into the right, and then the other one's catching on, because this is what is going to bind in or close off this thread, this fabric, excuse me, from unraveling. So now when I get to my side seams, you have a choice. You can fold it either way, but I am going to choose to fold mine towards the body. So for this first sleeve, I turned my seam to lay flat towards the body. Now I'm going to continue to zigzag this top edge. Now when I come to my other side of this seam, I'm turning it the other way. So it will lay flat and be pointed towards the body on this side. So I'm just going to go around and do that through this whole top area, neckline, for our nightgown, coming up on the other side seam, sleeve seam here. So I got that one turned the way I want it. And coming all the way around here, back to where I started, and then we'll have a look at this and see what we think. Now I'm going to cut off my starting threads here before I get to this point, so I don't want that all caught up. All right, I locked that in. I'm going to trim these threads back. Turn this right side out now so we can kind of see what this looks like. Okay, so there's the top edge. It's not the best looking edge, but it is an option. Again, because I have a serger, I'm going to take it over and do that. The other thing I could do at this point now is, with this, I might just turn this down because this is closed off, and then just zigzag this. And I think I'm going to do that and show you what that would look like. So we zigzagged it to close off the raw edge. Now we're going to do the same settings, and we're going to do a tight little turn over here and zigzag this to hold this down now. And that'll give our top a much nicer edge, I think. You have to experiment as you're sewing, find out what works for you, what works for the fabrics you're using. Don't be afraid to try different things. I hadn't thought of doing this till I started constructing this, because I really didn't like that, the way that edge was turning out just with the zigzag. It's a little bulky going over my seams here, so you can see I have to lift up my presser foot to get it to move over. Almost back to the beginning, and then we'll have a look at this and decide if we like this better. So again, I'm going to cut down these threads at my beginning. So I'm going to cut this back down, and now let's look at this edge. Oh, much nicer. Yeah, that's definitely the way to go at that top edge. Okay, so the next thing now we're going to do is we're going to leave this top edge, and we're going to sew the sleeve and the side seam together. So I'm lining up. This would be like the armpit area. So I line that up. And I'm keeping this seams turned the direction I had them when I did the neckline, because you want to keep them in the same direction. Otherwise it makes it not drape as nicely. So I'm just pinning this right sides together, as you can see, down the length of the sleeve. It's already pinned. And down now this side. Okay, so now I'm just going to sew this with 1/4 of an inch seam allowance. Don't forget to put your machine back to a straight stitch. When you do this, put all your settings back the way that they need to be for your machine. And I'm removing the pins. Going to lock in both ends. And I'm going to do this on both sides, so I'll show you once I get there. So I put my sides together. This is the side of the nightgown here. And I matched up, this is the sleeve, here's the hem that we put in earlier, and I matched this up perfectly, and I stitched all the way down to the end. Then what I did is I came right here at the armpit, and you can see how there's that notch taken out. What I did was, this was laying in this type of direction, like this. And I just took my little scissors, or any scissors for that matter, I don't have my little ones right here, and I nipped in. I went all the way as close as I could to my seam stitching, but not through it. I don't know if you can see that there. See how that opens up and the stitching is right here where my nail is? So I came pretty darn close. And what that does is that allows the seam, once you turn this right side out, for the seam to lay nice and flat. Then I took this to my serger and I serged all along the edge here to seal this off. And you're going to repeat that on the other side of the nightgown too. So both sides I sewed together first, nipped, and then serged. Okay, so I serged that seam, and there's different ways to tie off a serger seam. And for me, the easiest way is just to overstitch the edge a little bit and then knot off my thread here. And then what I do is I'm going to loop this back in, trim this down, and then I'm going to loop that back in to these threads here with a little crochet hook. That's just how I do it. You're free to do whatever works best for you. So now we're ready to do the ruffle at the bottom. So you have 2 rectangle pieces that are remaining. So just going to line up the short end on both sides and going to sew the 1/4 of an inch seam allowance on this. And again, I'm going to finish off these seams. For my case, I'm going to use a serger. You do what works for you. Okay, so those seams are now sewn and the edges are closed off. So the next thing I'm going to do here now is I am going to make the hem at the bottom. And we're just going to do that same thing like we did the hem on the sleeve. We're just going to roll it about 1/4 of an inch, a little bit less. Roll it again. Put a pin in to hold this. Do this all along this bottom edge. And then I'm going to go over to my mini easy press and I'm going to press this so that it holds for us. And then we're just going to stitch close to this fold line here to create the bottom hem. So let me get that all done and then we'll go to the next step. Okay, so I stitched the little hem at the bottom of my ruffle. Now the next thing we need to do is to put the gathering stitch around the other raw edge, and then we'll attach this onto the nightgown. Okay, now to form the gathering stitch, it's a basting stitch. That's essentially what it is. So I am going to start here at the side seam, the junction. We have 2 of these on this bottom here. And I am going to sew forward without doing a lock-in stitch because we want to be able to pull these threads so you don't lock them in. I have my stitch length up to 4 so that this will be a very loose seam or line of stitches. You can see how long the distance is between my stitches there. On this machine, 4 is the longest I can get, so that's what I'm doing. It's 4 stitches per inch. Now I'm coming up on that other side here, seam. So I'm going to sew just till I get close to that side seam. Now I am going to pull this out, and I'm going to cut my thread, leaving long tails. So I have a long tail at this end, and I have a long tail at this end. Now I'm going to go back to the part where I just cut it, and now I'm going to start on the next section. So I'll be able to pull this up and gather from 4 different places. And you'll see what I mean when we get there. So again, not locking it in, just sewing all the way around till I get back to that next side seam, which we've already seen. This is where we started, right here. So now I'm going to stitch up to this point, or close to that seam, and stop. And again, I'm cutting with long tails. All right, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my 2 side seams and I'm going to match those up. If you use the water washable pen to get the side seams, seam allowances drawn on, these marks will be on there, but I didn't, so I have to mark this now. So I'm going to take a black tipped balled pin. I use the black ones as my markings that there's something special happening there. So now I've put in the front the halfway point on that one, and I'm going to do the same thing on this other side. So now I'll have my center front and my center back marked. Now there's no difference between these pieces, so you can put either one on the front and then on the back. And now I'm going to take my nightgown and I'm going to bring the side seams together on this also. And you can see that this is kind of a little curvy, and that's what it's intended to be, that bottom. And I'm matching up my side seams, and again, I'm going to put a pin in here to match my center front on this side. And then on this side, I'm doing the center back. So now I'm going to take my ruffle and I am going to turn the dress right side out. I don't know if I showed you those armpit areas yet to show you how, because we nipped it, it'll lay nice and, yeah. Okay, can you see how, because we nipped that, how nice that lays here in the armpit area? That's why you do that nip. Okay, so now I've got this right side out. I've got my ruffle wrong side out. And again, let me find what's the front and the back. Okay, so I've got this front side up. And now I'm going to take my ruffle and I am going to put it over the bottom, just like that. I'm going to take this center front pin and I'm going to line up these raw edges and the pins matching. Don't need 2 pins here now, just need 1. And then I'm going to work myself around and I'm going to align now my side seams. And I am going to put a pin here to hold that. Working myself around to the back now, I'm going to line these center back, pin to pin. Pin that, coming to the side, and doing the same thing. Now when you're doing these sides, remember how we left those long tail on those gathering stitches? I'm just making sure that on the side that I'm working on, the ruffle side, I have my 2 long threads on this side so that I can pull them. Because that's how you gather this up. So again, I'm going to put a pin in here. And now I'm going to take one side, one of the long threads, and I'm going to start slowly pulling. You can see how it's causing the fabric to gather up. That's exactly what you want to happen. And then you just take your finger and you gently move this to where you want it. Now you want to pull up on this ruffle until the raw edges align up and you don't have extra fabric billowing on the side. This is just from the ruffle here while this gap's here. And then I'm going to take this thread and I'm going to figure 8 this around this pin. And that's what holds this from moving. Then I'm going to come to my other side, still working on that same stretch of the ruffle, and I'm going to now pull from this side, again making sure that it lines up. Just like that, doing a figure 8 around this pin. Now I'm going to move to the next section, finding the thread to that one, and again pulling it. Now you could see this is still gapping. See how that still gaps? It really didn't tighten up all the way yet. That's what I'm talking about. We keep pulling this until this all fits nice and snug in, and then we figure eight it around the pin to hold it. And again, rotating to this side and doing the same exact thing with this thread. So this is our last one to gather. And then once we get this all pulled up where we want it, we're now going to space these gathers through the area, because you can see how it's all bunched here. So I'm just using my finger to gently move the gather so it gathers a little bit in this whole section. And then I'm going to line this up with the raw edge on the gown part and pin this in. And I'm going to do this through all 4 sections. Now, if you find that you either pulled it up too tight or not tight enough, just go back to the thread that you figure eighted around those pins and undo it and pull up or loosen up, whichever you need to do. So let me do that, and then I'll show you when it's all pinned. All right, so I've got this all pinned along the bottom. I got my gathering spaced out the way I'd like it to be. So now I'm just going to sew 1/4 inch from the raw edge, and I'm putting my stitch length back down to a 2.5, which is my standard sewing length. Going to lock this in, and I'm just going to pull these pins out as I get to them. And I'm going to sew all the way around till I come back to where I started, and I'll lock it in there. So I'll be back to show you once it's all stitched. Okay, so I've got that all stitched now. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to come back here and I'm going to find my gathering threads, and I'm going to pull all that out. And sometimes it comes out all in one piece, nice and neat. Sometimes I have to use my seam ripper to help find it and pull it out. But you can see, this is from the right side now, that sometimes, yeah, here. I don't know if you can see that, but can you see that the gathering stitches are showing right there and here? Just barely showing, but I like to pull all this out as best as I can so that nothing shows from the right side. Oh, it looks like I just got minimal that showed, so that was good. So I'm going to go back and find those sections with my seam ripper here and pull this out. Because I don't want to leave these stitches in. Just doesn't look very nice when you see those gathering stitches. It helps if you use a contrasting thread to find these, but I never do. I always forget to change. It's just another step, and I don't want to be bothered with it. And now I'm going to pull it from this side and get all this out. Now again, we need to do something with this seam to close this edge off, because you can see how it's starting to fray. So I'm going to take this to my serger, and I'm going to serge this end, the seam, so it doesn't fray. All right, so the last step is to add the elastic around the neckline. So ignore what I said about cutting your piece to 8 inches long. Leave it as long as it comes, because you're going to want to pin it around about a 1/2 inch down from the edge. You're going to want to pin this elastic, and then we'll pull it up so that it becomes the 8 inches to then fit nicely around the doll's neckline. So what I did, I don't know if you can see this, but I put the pin in, and I took just a smidge of fabric. Then I brought the pin over the elastic, back down into the fabric and up again. So now the elastic is being held between that pin. Because what we're going to do is we're going to do a zigzag stitch over this elastic. And that's how we're going to put this into the dress. So here's where it overlaps. So I'm going to start here where it overlaps. I'm using a zigzag stitch, and I have my width set to the widest stitch width I can do on my zigzag on this machine. And again, I am putting my stitch length down to 2 because I want this kind of tight together like we did at the neckline to hold this elastic in. And again, I'm not going to sew over the pins. I'm going to remove the pins. But I'm going to make sure that when I'm sewing this, so go nice and slow, that you don't actually catch the elastic in your stitching. It's very important because otherwise you can't pull it up if you are sewing into that elastic. So I'm removing my pins as I get to them. Just go nice and slow, there's no rush. With most sewing, there's no rush. Gently kind of give your elastic a little pull because that'll hold it more in a straight line. All right, so I'll come back once I get all the way back to where I started. Okay, so I have stitched zigzag down this elastic, and now I'm starting to pull it. So this is like gathering, the same thing we did at the ruffle, and I'm just going to work this all around till I pull this up to a tightness that I like for this neckline. So you can see I'm just working this around and around till we get up to something that I think is going to look good. So I zigzagged all the way around the elastic now and pulled it up. And I want this measurement, when you lay this flat from side to side, to be about 5 inches, not 8 inches or 4 inches, but 5 inches, because the 8 will be, or the 4 across here will be too tight to fit onto the doll. So this should measure anywhere from about 4.5 to 5 inches along the elastic here. So then I took my 2 ends, I tied them together to form a knot, trimmed off the excess elastic that we don't need, and now your dress is done. So let me get this moved a little bit so you can see this better. Okay, so there is the nightgown for the 18-inch doll, or the American Girl type of doll. Now this I did in flannel, so this is a nightgown. You could certainly do this in a cotton or a knit, and it could become a little dress for the doll. You can shorten the sleeves. I have all my patterns so that they're all adjustable, customizable, and strictly up to you what you'd like to do with this pattern. Hope you enjoyed this video. You can follow me at Fabric Fun with Cricut Design Space Facebook group. You need to be a member of Cricut Design Space Facebook group first before you can join the fabric group. Hope you enjoyed this video.